At least before they could at least see
Okay,
me and
dear,
hear me.
she's trying to do it. She said it'll be.
Well, good afternoon, everybody from across Canada, and I'm told from different parts of the world today who are joining us for what will be, I hope, a very special broadcast. Welcome to our virtual Fireside chat. This is in honor of the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe and the Liberation of Holland. Today's chat is hosted by True Patriot Love Foundation, Canada's leading foundation supporting the military and veteran community. My name is Peter Mansbridge. I'll be your moderator for the discussion that will take place over the next hour. Thank you for joining us for this special online event. Now, this is a very important day in history. 75 years ago today, the 1st Canadian Army accepted the surrender of German forces in the Netherlands, which marked the liberation of Holland. 3 days later, Germany formally surrendered and the Second World War officially came to an end in Europe. 25 years ago, on the 50th anniversary, I remember sitting in the room in a town in the Netherlands called Wageningen, where the surrender had taken place in 1945. And one of the people in that room on that day with me was General George Kitching, one of the Canadian officers who'd been sitting in Wageningen in 1945, taking the surrender from the German forces. I asked him how he felt. What did it feel like to be sitting in that room again? And he looked at me and he said, "Peter, I can still see the ghosts of those Nazi officers who surrendered on that day 50 years ago." Well, today it's 75 years ago. Over the next hour, we will hear from our 3 panelists as they share their insights on this major historical milestone and provide perspective on how the lessons from the war can help us navigate the current crisis, a war in effect, on COVID-19. This is an interactive discussion with viewers across the country. We've already had many great questions submitted to us in advance. Some of these will be incorporated into our conversation today. Now, you can also submit questions directly during the broadcast. You can go to the comment section on the chat, which you see on your screen, or you can email us at events@truepatriotlove.com. That's events@truepatriotlove.com. And we may ask it live during the discussion. Now, I'm joined today, very lucky to be joined today by 3 very special panelists, and I'd like to take a moment to introduce each one. First up, General Rick Hillier. No surprise to you, the general, retired now, is a celebrated military leader who served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 35 years and commanded troops from the platoon to multinational formation level within Canada, Europe, Asia, and the United States. He was appointed Chief of the Defense Staff in 2005. That, of course, is Canada's highest ranking position in the Canadian Forces. And General Hillier oversaw our country's most important mission in Afghanistan. Welcome, General.
Thank you, Peter.
Captain Martin Maxwell retired. He's joining us, I think, by phone today. We've been having a little trouble getting back and forth with the captain in the last few minutes, but I think he'll be joining us by phone. He's a decorated veteran. Now listen to this background to the captain. He served in the Second World War when he was just 21 years old. During the war, he flew a glider and was one of the first to land in Normandy the night before D-Day to capture Pegasus Bridge and prevent the Germans from sending reinforcements. He fought in the Battle of Arnhem, and on the last day of that battle was wounded, later captured as a prisoner of war. He was liberated 75 years ago this month, 1945. As a German-speaking British officer, he was tasked with investigations relating to the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. For his service, he was awarded some of the highest honors, including the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. There you see a picture of Captain Maxwell, and the Legion of Honor from France. And we welcome Captain Maxwell to our special program today. And third, Corporal Kelly Scanlan, also retired now, She joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2007 as an infantry soldier and deployed to Afghanistan when she was just 19 years old. She faced a few struggles, both physical and mental, because of her time in Afghanistan, but she was able to eventually overcome them with the help of several veterans organizations. She represented Team Canada at the 2017 Invictus Games in Toronto, where she won a bronze and a gold medal in swimming. And in 2017, she started a new career as a firefighter. Kelly also took on the challenge of climbing to Everest Base Camp in Nepal as part of Troop Patriot Love's 2018 expedition. And welcome to you, Corporal Scanlan.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
Oh, we're proud to have you. I just wanted to mention before we actually start hearing from all the panelists, before we go any further in this special program, that we are thinking throughout this program, as we have been for most of the last week, about the family and friends of those members of the Canadian Forces who we lost last week in that tragic situation off the coast of Greece, where a helicopter that had been based on HMCS Fredericton went down in the waters off Greece. So we think of those 6 members of the Canadian Forces again today, as that tragic event has been on our minds often in this past week. So let me begin with our questions to our panelists. And General Hillier, why don't you start off by talking about the significance of this, the 75th anniversary? Why is this such an important milestone? What does it mean to you?
Well, Peter, it's an important milestone to me, not just because I was a soldier and maybe in some ways still consider myself a soldier, but as a very proud Canadian. I'm proud of what we did in our history, and I'm proud of how we stood up as the great nation that we want to be and that we believe that we are, and did what was right around the world. And I think your words about the 6 young Canadians that we just lost reflect that this continues, and I know my heart goes out to the families of those 6, of that 1 daughter and 5 sons of our great nation who were serving us. And I think that is a reminder that the unlimited liability of men and women who put on the uniform and signed the contract, each accepts their family wares and why we should be so proud of them. But I also got to say at the front end here, oh my goodness, what a privilege to be here with Captain Maxwell. Sir, thank you for your service. God bless you for being here today. I've stood at Pegasus Bridge so many times, and I looked at the clockwork precision of how that operation took place to protect the very vulnerable left flank of the entire Allied invasion, all 5 beaches, because they were worried the Panzers would roll from the left and roll up the beaches left to right. And just after midnight, those gliders came in, the troops came out, and of course, took that bridge and made sure that that attack couldn't occur. And when you stand there and look and see those gliders with a feat of navigation second to none in history, landed within feet of their destination under flak fire, navigating by compass and the clouds and the stars on a map, and landing there. Oh my goodness, I get a thrill down my back just thinking about having Captain Maxwell here with us. What a privilege, sir, to be on the same panel with you. This is a meaningful anniversary, Peter. It's 3/4 of a century, 75 years, 3/4 of a century of a time when good triumphed over evil. And 1st Canadian Army and Canada and Canadians were part of the good, and we helped destroy the evil, which was Nazism and fascism. And we helped take that burden of the winter of starvation off the back of the good folks of Holland in the winter of 1945. And at this time, I think it's so special is because we have this great juxtaposition right now of 3 generations. Captain Maxwell's generation is described by Tom Brokaw, the American journalist, as being the greatest generation ever. Those who won World War II and came back to build the societies that we know and we love and we enjoy, we raise our families in, we work in right now. That greatest generation is with us. You have the baby boomer generation, which came from that generation. And maybe I'm at the back end of that baby boomer generation, at least I like to think so. So I can appreciate directly from that greatest generation just what an incredible feat of arms they achieved. And then thirdly, we've got that next generation represented here by Kelly. And all three of us are here. We got handed the torch from that greatest generation. We tried to carry it well, and now we hand it to people like Kelly. And so at this time in our history, the 75th anniversary, we got a chance to appreciate all three generations and actually know people like Captain Maxwell, because they left us a legacy of service, a legacy that some things are worth more than just the individual, and you have to step up. A legacy that great nations do great things. And now with all three generations here on the 75th anniversary, 3/4 of a century after the end of World War II in Europe, we get to appreciate that. I think that makes it very special indeed.
Well, let's bring Captain Maxwell into the conversation then, once again by phone. But Captain, this 75th anniversary of a moment where, I mean, you were there through that conflict, as the general says, right from D-Day. What does this anniversary mean for you?
Well, it means that we live now in a world that we want to live in, except the virus interrupted us. If it wouldn't be for that, I, my wife, and maybe 100 veterans who fought in Holland would be over there celebrating with them, and hundreds of thousands of people would line the streets cheering us on. I remember 20 years ago, 12,000 of us went. 10 years ago, the passage of time had that reduced that tragically. But I went to the cemetery where 1,700 of my comrades lay buried. 10,000 of us came to honor them. Only 2,300 got back. The rest were killed, wounded, and taken prisoner. I remember going to the cemetery, and a man approached me with 3 children. He said, "My children are 8, 12, and 13. We're going to the big parade tomorrow, but I brought them here today to show them what was necessary and what was done so that we, the Dutch people, have our freedom." And as I walked around, I came to a grave that had a fairly big picture there, a family picture, and a young man in uniform. That young man in uniform was in that grave. But it said, "You will always be with us." And as I walked further, I came to a grave that said something that I always carried with me. It says, "For your tomorrows, we gave our todays." But as I stood there, I thought of different things that happened in the world. The event in Rwanda, where our own general tried to get troops, but nobody listened. In Belgium withdrew their last troops, and 800,000 Rwandans were brutally murdered. And I looked at these young men in their graves, and I thought, if they had a chance to look at the world today, I know what they would say. "What the hell have you done with the tomorrows we gave you?" But we were the people who were in the front line. And when the war ended, wonderful parades, and we received medals. But I'm looking at those who are on the front line today. Yes, the nurses, like my own granddaughter, Lonnie Maxwell, and the doctors, and those who keep the hospitals clean, the truck drivers who make sure we have food, the police and the firemen, and lately, our own men in military who are called on to look after the retirement homes and the nursing homes. So they are now risking their lives for our tomorrow. and we are certainly grateful. And I'm grateful to be alive to see all this.
And we're grateful you're with us, Captain. It's an amazing story you tell, and the way you've tied all of our history into that one answer is quite remarkable. Let me bring Corporal Scanlan in as well.
Good, thank you.
In terms of Corporal, your sense of service today, knowing that you followed in the footsteps of people like General Hillier and Captain Maxwell, what has that meant to you? How has those times influenced you?
Well, I think when I first joined the military as a even younger person, you don't understand that influence. You don't realize the impact that everyone before you has on your time in service. But the more and more time you spend on it, you realize how much we are all connected across these endless generations, these endless conflicts, everything from the tiniest traditions and symbols that we carry with us all come from the people before. And having served in a very different conflict in a very different time, I think one thing that kind of continues on for all of us is the hope that what we do makes an impact in someone's life, that changes their life for the better. So what Captain Maxwell did in Europe, what all the other generations before me did across many different conflicts and many different peacekeeping missions, we were all, and what my generation has been doing in Afghanistan, we all hope for the same thing, that what we did will change someone's life and will change it for the better. And I remember a conversation Captain Maxwell had with us previously where he talked about meeting the later generations of children whose parents and grandparents were impacted by the actions him and his fellow soldiers had taken. And I think about the people I interacted with in Afghanistan. I think about the children that may one day go on to have children of their own, and they may see a completely different country. And we're still in a time period where we're waiting to see what the legacy will be of my service and the service of other soldiers who served around me. But I think the one thing that we all hope across all generations is that we are carrying forward something good for the people that we fought beside and for the people that we fought for.
If I can just remind the panelists, we've got lots of questions coming in, and I'm going to ask one of them right now. It's for Captain Maxwell, but if the panelists could keep that in mind, if we're going to get to a lot of questions, we have to keep that in mind when we're giving our answers. So Captain Maxwell, this question's for you, and it's come in from one of the viewers. Can you share some reflections about how life was on the home front during World War II and how it changed as the war progressed? You were at the front, obviously, certainly through the last year of the war, but you must have been in touch with how things were progressing on the home front as well before that.
Yes, I have the greatest admiration for the British people. In 1940 and 1941, they were bombed night and day, but they kept their humor up. And I also greatly admire the King and Queen, who were asked to leave England for safety in Australia or New Zealand. And they said no. I still remember them going to the East End when it was bombed and shaking hands and tell them, keep up your spirit. And they set the example for us. The home front was something that I will never forget, because I saw a place like Coventry almost completely destroyed. I had friends there and they all died. But they showed us what courage is, and we followed it. I just want to mention something. When I was in Holland last, on parade, and thousands of people lined the street, a little girl pushed through and handed me flowers and a letter. And beside me were radio people, television people, and they said, could you read us what's in the letter? And I said, here it is. Long, long ago you came and you fought, and many of you died. But you saved my Oma. She was sick and you gave her medicine. She was hungry and you gave her food. And you dropped food from your planes that we Dutch people will not starve to death. That's why I'm here today, to shake your hand and say thank you.
That's a great story, as all your stories, Captain Maxwell, are. You mentioned the King and the Queen. Over my shoulder here in my little office in Stratford, that's a picture of Winston Churchill, who signed that during the year 1941 in his office, in the Prime Minister's office at 10 Downing Street. And he was another one of those remarkable people who gave inspiration to the, not only the British people and the English people, but to people who were supporting the Allied effort around the world. General Hillier, a question to you, and that is to do with Canada's role in the Netherlands and the liberation of the Netherlands in the spring of 1945. Can you talk about how critical the nature of Canada's involvement in the conflict in the Netherlands was?
Peter, it was crucial. We were a significant part of the Allied efforts to destroy the Nazis and to free Europe and the world, in fact, from that crushing yoke. First Canadian Army was an enormous organization. We had 1.1 million Canadians in uniform during World War II, in the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, and other services supporting it. And without those men and women from our nation serving with great courage, with incredible leadership, the war would have taken a different tone. We were a part of every significant event that actually led to the defeat of Nazi Germany. And nowhere was it more obvious, more important, more impactful than in Northwest Europe and in Holland itself. And when I look at that, I always think about two things. Number one is leadership. We have this little saying that everybody is a leader. And in that First Canadian Army, commanding over 15 divisions, there were strategic leaders who were Canadian, right down to young privates who were their first day of combat, who stood up and led into action. And they knew that leadership is most respected when it comes from the front. And Canadians demonstrated that. They knew that leaders don't hide. And Canadians were the first to be out leading from the front. And secondly, I think they demonstrated a courage in the activities going into Holland, the courage necessary to liberate and free the Dutch. And that courage, I don't think there's anybody in the world who's more courageous than somebody who is frightened to death and yet still does what is necessary. And whether you were a young soldier on your very first day in combat, or whether you were a seasoned veteran of Normandy or Italy, or the march up to Northwest Europe, you were frightened and you still went and did your job, sometimes at the cost of your life. Canada's efforts, and 1st Canadian Army, supported by the Air Force and Navy in particular, were responsible with our allies for defeating Nazi Germany and freeing Western Europe and getting us into the world that we had a chance to shape, that we now live and love and call home.
You know, Captain Maxwell, your experience at the end of the war was unique in the sense that you were in a German prisoner of war camp. So you got your freedom at roughly the same time the Dutch were getting theirs, thanks in large part to Canadian forces. Can you talk about those two experiences that you witnessed? You witnessed the Dutch getting their freedom at a time you were getting your own.
Well, we were in the last few weeks of when I was a prisoner, the Germans were really tough on us. We woke up one morning surrounded by tanks, and we thought we were well prepared. We were willing to fight them. But what they wanted to do, and they actually marched us out to negotiate with the Allies so they could go through the lines back home, so they would leave us alone. But the Allies said, no, you want to go home? That's your business. Do not touch our soldiers and the people that are prisoners. And thankfully, we were allowed back into the camp. And when we saw that British tank, I can tell you it was something unbelievable. I weighed 87 pounds when we were liberated.
Mm.
And of course,
Wow.
when I speak to the people, I should have been in Holland now, but unfortunately the virus stopped us. Let me tell you how much the Canadians are respected. All over Europe, I've traveled, and I often see people wear the Canadian insignia who are not Canadians. I don't want to offend the Americans. Many Americans are doing this. I have in front of me the Globe and Mail dated June the 7th, 1944. I'm sorry I cannot show it to you, but when you open it, it showed how each army has advanced. And I can tell you this, I'm looking at it, the Canadians advanced more than anybody else. God bless them.
I want to tell viewers about something special that you're doing, Captain Maxwell, because you're somebody who obviously understands the sacrifices that accompany a military career. You're now raising funds to support those in the military and veteran community who live with service-related challenges.
Yeah.
Why? I want people to understand how they can also take part in this.
Okay.
And so let me mention a few things here.
Yeah.
If you'd like to support Captain Maxwell in his efforts and help him achieve his $75,000 fundraising goal, you can donate on his GoFundMe page at gofundme.com/Captain-Maxwell. Funds raised will be invested into programs and services for those in the military who need it most during the pandemic and beyond, such as mental health support, family assistance, and programs to assist veterans struggling to transition to civilian life. And incidentally, today is Giving Tuesday, and a generous donor will also match the first $25,000 in donations. So for every dollar you give, the foundation will receive $2. There's the address. We'll leave that on the screen for a second. And Kelly, Corporal Scanlan, I want to bring you in here at this point because you're someone who's, has struggled over the years as a result of some of the things that affected your life and your time in Afghanistan. How has this kind of support helped you?
This kind of support is critical. I don't like to use the phrase life-changing very lightly, but that's exactly what something like this did for me. When I came home from Afghanistan, I was just turning 20 years old, and I was dealing with a physical injury, and I was dealing with different mental health issues, and was basically being told that my entire life, the entire future that I had planned out for myself was about to be turned on its head, that everything I thought I wanted was just not going to be an option anymore. And I tried all kinds of different medical therapies to try and get through these difficult times, and just nothing really seemed to work until I started becoming involved with different veterans organizations that kind of just showed me a different path forward. And it was through donations of Canadians and people all over the world that I was kind of able to get that support and that help to be involved in these different challenges that I never would have taken on before, like the Invictus Games and the climb to Nepal. These were things I just thought I'd never be able to do. And so to have Captain Maxwell and everybody continue to support veterans the way they supported me is absolutely amazing. And I can't thank him enough, and I can't thank everybody else enough for the support that they've shown us over the years, and hopefully will continue to show other veterans in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, Captain Maxwell, why don't you tell us why you got involved in this and decided you wanted to do this?
Because I lost so many of my friends who died, but I found the families had terrible trouble afterwards and say, how can we do this? These people gave their lives. Why are they being neglected? Incidentally, I don't just ask other people to give money. I made my own generous donation. And I hope for all the people who are watching, I'm just thinking something. There's a veteran locked up in a room and he knows he's dying, but nobody can come near them, him or her, to at least hold his or her hands when they leave. But can you imagine how the family feels and what troubles they're going through? We truly must support these people and any other veteran who needs the support. So I say to you who are out there, give generously and you will remember. And I have a saying as we go through these terrible times. That goes like this, and this also will pass. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for any donations that you make, because we desperately need that to help those who really wait for our help. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless our great country, Canada.
And thank you, Captain Maxwell. Let's move on a little bit here now in terms of trying to gauge the influence of the war, the influence of the Second World War. So a quick question to you, General Hillier, as we go back to World War II, how do you think the courage and the dedication of the Canadian troops during that war influenced our military's handling of other conflicts like the one you led in Afghanistan?
Oh, Peter, I think it was present in everything we did and every single second that we were doing it. One, we realized, I think Kelly alluded to it a little while ago, is that every road we take is lined by those who have gone before us. And we got inspired by the example of people like Captain Maxwell. And we knew that they had done, we knew that we had to step our game up, and we knew they had handed us a torch, and we were not going to insult them, insult their memory or their legacy by dropping that torch. And when you have that kind of motivation, you can go out and change the world. We learned from them that every person is a leader. And when there's a void, you stand up and fill that void as the leader that you are. And we took that and moved it forward. But most importantly, I think, we learned that, our best weapons didn't rumble on tracks or roll on wheels. They walked in combat boots. And we as leaders were focused on making sure that we could enable and empower and inspire those awesome weapons, Canada's sons and daughters, to achieve the things our nation has them to do. I just happened to be looking yesterday through a list of the 15 people who won the Star of Military Valor out of Afghanistan. 15 people won the second highest award that our nation can bestow on anybody for valor under fire from the enemy. And when you read their stories, you understand that there, but for 50, 60 years, is the generation of Captain Maxwell. And we took the torch, that generation took the torch, those incredible individuals, and they carried it very, very well. I think everything that we did was shaped by the generation of World War II and their awesome accomplishments.
Corporal Scanlan, you're obviously a member of a younger generation, and many of the questions that we've been getting already are about how we continue to honor the sacrifices of those who served in past conflicts, starting with World War II, particularly with younger Canadians. What are your thoughts on that? How do we engage younger Canadians on the sacrifices of the past?
The number one way I would say is just to not forget these stories that come before us. They vary so much. They come from across the world and from across all different time periods. And one of the things I think that we don't do enough here in Canada is sharing these stories, sharing stories like Captain Maxwell's and everybody else who served alongside him. Some of the younger generations, like I know when I was in high school and we kind of do the Europe trip, you don't realize how much our past generations had an impact on countries on the other side of the world from us, just because the history isn't always taught with the same vigor that it's taught in Europe or in other places in the world. So just not forgetting these stories and making sure that the generations, my generation, the generations that come after us, that they know these stories and they understand the impact people their age and their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents had all across the world. And they may not even realize it until they learn what came before them. So the number one way is just to make sure these stories don't die.
And, taking nothing away from the veterans of the Second World War and Korea and other operations and conflicts that took place during the 20th century, you represent the 21st century and the conflict in Afghanistan. And sometimes one fears that the stories of that conflict and Canadians' involvement in it aren't told enough to today's youngest generation.
Yeah, and I think I don't know how much all my fellow soldiers share their own stories across their friends and their family and their community. I think a lot of us probably have an easier time talking about the amazing people that came before us and the people we served around rather than what we did. But it may be a time for all of us, all soldiers across all generations to, I know some groups collect these stories. We just have to make sure that as much as we pass on the ones that came before us, that we're sharing our own as well, and that none of this will ever be forgotten.
General, you talked about the Canadian soldiers who won special mention in terms of the medals they were awarded. But I think for most Canadians who remember the names of some of those soldiers from, the Second World War, the Andrew Minarskis and so many others that you tell, we perhaps don't underline enough the heroic efforts that were made by Canadian forces in places like Afghanistan and Bosnia before it.
Peter, I often get asked, what can we do more to remember, to ensure that all these incredible heroic deeds are always remembered? And my answer is always simple. Teach our history. Force our history to be taught. Teach it in schools. Teach it in the society. Teach it in government. Teach it in jobs. I don't care where. Teach our history. You cannot help but be inspired by it. Every road you take is lined by those who've gone before you, as I said. You will be inspired. There are lessons to be learned. There is no problem that we face that has not been faced by somebody or a generation before us, and we can learn from them. So teach our history, teach what led to the development of this great democratic nation that we are, and the requirements to get there, and the requirements that should be kept strong in order to keep us a strong democracy. Because so many of those lessons and so many of those things and characteristics came out of World War I and World War II. Teach our history. Don't let it not be taught.
I want to bring Captain Maxwell in here now on this next point, because I think you have the experience, sir, that none of the rest of us have. Many of the questions that have come in from the audience are around the topic of resiliency on the part of Canadians related to the pandemic that we're going through. You mentioned it earlier and the challenges that it represents. What can the military teach us about resilience, and how can we build this quality in ourselves and more broadly in our communities? Can you try that one for us, sir?
I will. And I'll say, just you know any World War II veterans, what they went through for your country and for the world's freedom, try and copy them a little bit, because I learned something when I was 6 years old that I've always taken with me. I was playing and my mother was knitting in the corner and I fell and I hurt my knee. And I said, "Mommy, Mommy, my knee hurts." And she said the words that are always with me: "Get up and come over here and I'll kiss it better." What did it teach me? We all fall down, but it's the getting up that is the most important. Each one through our lives, go through terrible times, but we must, and we do, overcome it. I just want to tell you one little thing. Last time, 4 or 5 years ago, 125 of us went to Holland. And we met in the big sports palace, 15,000 people. They spoke to us and they sang the famous song, "We'll Meet Again," Virulent song. And they all stood up. And let me tell you, there were tears on both sides because both they and we, the veterans, knew that we will not be back. And we are not. But they asked me to speak, and this is what I said, and this is what I say when I speak to schools and universities. There are so few of us left, so we are handing over the torch of freedom to you, the next generation. Hold it high so others can see how precious freedom is. And if ever you're called on to fight for it, do it with all you have, because once it is lost, it is almost impossible to get back. It took us 5 years and millions of dead and wounded to give you, the Dutch people, and others back their freedom. God bless you and God bless both our countries. Thank you.
Corporal Scanlan, you obviously in your time in Afghanistan, you had to face challenges with resilience, and you watched others do the same thing. Now you're a first responder, you're a firefighter. You still have to draw upon that quality of resilience to deal with the issues that you have to as a firefighter, some of which now involve operations as a result of the pandemic that's been infected different parts of our country. What can you draw upon from that issue of resilience that would make sense for us to understand how we deal with this current situation?
I learned a lot from my time in the military about resiliency, and I've learned even more after leaving the military. And I could talk all day about it, but I'll say I think the one point that really kind of sticks with me then and sticks with me now is when I served, and in my current role as a firefighter, nothing you do is about you as an individual. You have to focus on a team of people around you. You have to focus on a community of people around you. And everything that you do and every action that you take isn't just for the betterment of yourself or to take care of yourself. It has to be for the brother or sister beside you. It has to be for the member of the wider population that you're trying to take care of and trying to help. And I think I'm seeing that on a larger scale. I think everyone needs to see that across the whole world, is that everything we're doing is not just for us, it's for our entire community. And I'm lucky enough to see a lot of people take this action to take care of each other in times like this. But I'd say that's the number one draw I took from the military, on top of everything else I learned about resiliency, is do what you know will be best for everybody around you, for a wider group of people. Even if it's just one other person, you can really change somebody's life by even just the smallest action.
Your story is such an inspiration for all of us, and I'm wondering whether you have thoughts on how we inspire others, to serve their country. It could be in uniform or it could be out of uniform, but some form of public service. How do we inspire that?
I think the thing that a lot of people have difficulty with is they think on this huge grand scale. And this is a thought process I definitely had when I was in Afghanistan, is you see the huge wide map in front of you, you see everything that's going on, and you're almost overwhelmed by thinking there's so much happening in a lot of different directions. And you kind of have to bring it back to yourself as an individual and think, okay, I may not be able to change everything I see in front of me, but I as a person can do one thing that changes one life or one community, and that can be worthwhile to so many people. And I think the same thing can kind of be happening now, is you don't have to do something that's these huge grand gestures. It can be the smallest thing of, if you don't feel comfortable going, like for the pandemic right now, if you don't feel comfortable going around the public or interacting with other people, go to a local park and clean up some of the garbage you see there. If you are willing and able, you can help your neighbors by dropping off groceries. You can make donations for PPE to help people in hospitals. There's all these tiny little things you can do, and you don't realize that even if you just change one person's life, it has repercussions across the entire board. And I think people just have to remember that one thing is enough.
General, can you also touch on that, the ability to inspire, especially young people, to involve themselves in public service?
But I think the best example is the great example of people like Kelly. Like, if you want to belong to one of the best, most exciting teams, most cohesive and powerful teams in the world, and get to serve with people like Kelly. If you want to take part in something that's actually life-changing for most of the world, life-changing, then get involved in the Canadian Armed Forces and get an opportunity to work with people like Kelly. And in the Armed Forces, and not just, you get a chance to expand your individual capabilities, to get confidence, to learn leadership, and to come out of it a much better person. You don't have to serve for life. Many of us wanted to do that, but just a short period of time also works. You know, you get an opportunity to grow, you get an opportunity to give and give back, and you get an opportunity to have the most exciting existence that you can think about, and you get an opportunity to serve with people like Kelly. That's what I would suggest would inspire me.
We're close to the end of our time, but we do have time to give some thoughts from each of you as our panelists. Some thoughts about how we commemorate what is a historical milestone, the 75th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe and the liberation of Holland, mostly by Canadian troops. So I want to get some final thoughts from you on the milestone, which comes to us in the midst of a global crisis, the pandemic. So your thoughts on this, Captain Maxwell, perhaps to start us off on these final thoughts.
Okay, I traveled all over the world and spoken all over the world. And I always come back to Canada with great joy to realize that we live in a wonderful country. We should be grateful for that. Honestly, if I had my way, I'd have all the young people at least give a year's service to something, to somebody, to do something special. And again, if we can do something for one person, we never know how that stops. I have to tell you the story that the students love this. And I was a salesman, and the man behind the counter, the pharmacist said, "Could you get me a coffee?" It was the end of November. It was freezing. And as I walked out, I saw a man leaning against the wall, shivering. He said to me, "Sir, can you give me 40 cents for a coffee?" I said, "Come on." And I bought him a breakfast. And 4 weeks later, I was back again. And I said, "How is the bum?" I called him the bum. He said, "The poor soul, he was so hungry. We gave him an apple pie and ice cream." So have you seen him? They called him out. He was a man who came from Newfoundland to work. He became very sick. For 8 months, he was in the hospital. And when he came out, he had nowhere to go, just on the street. Anyhow, he said to me, "The chef is so nice to me, sending me to cooking school." 16 years went by, and I got a letter. "Dear Mr. Maxwell, I finally found you. I have to tell you that I met a girl in the church. We are married, we have 2 children, and we own a house and a car, and I'm a chef in a great restaurant. all because you spent just over $1 to buy me a breakfast. That's all you have to do. Help one person and you'll feel better, and they certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. Corporal Scanlan, your thoughts as we wrap up this special broadcast and how we sort of tie the experiences of the past to the whole issue of the global pandemic right now.
I think the one thing that everyone needs to remember is that depending on your generation, this may be the first time you've seen something like this. But I think across history, we all just need to remember that we as a global community have struggled through and survived storm after storm after storm, whether it was the wars that have come before or other illnesses or natural disasters. There are always storms that are going to hit us as a world and as all different countries and all different communities and all different generations. But when we stick together, we always survive them. We always come through the other side, and we can be better for it. We can learn from it. We can end up creating relationships and creating skills that we never even realized we had to develop until we had to survive these storms together. And while this is a difficult time and there are losses and everybody is struggling, I think just like everything that's come before, we will come out on the other side of this. We just have to stay the course, and we have to support each other as best we can. And I think that's something that they saw 75 years ago, and that's something we're seeing today, and that's something we'll continue to see as long as we across the world stick together and help each other as best we can.
General, you get the final word, sir.
Peter, thank you. You know, I've been thinking about this a lot in recent days and weeks, and we were due to be on the pilgrimage now into Europe. And I would say that the best way to honor, to commemorate, to remember that greatest generation like Captain Maxwell is let's win this damn war on COVID-19. This is our moment. This is our destiny as individuals. Theirs was to go ashore at Normandy or liberate Holland from the winter of starvation and the Nazis. Ours is to defeat COVID-19 with an entirely different mission. Let's win that one. Believe in yourself, and then believe in the teams that we have around this nation. Just think of those emergency room teams, those trauma room centers, the incredible teams and skill sets and professionalism that are going to work to save us. Stay active. Let's take the lessons from that generation of World War II. Stay active. Make yourself fit. Make yourself stronger. So when this is over and we step out the door, we are fitter and stronger. And you know, it doesn't always work, but many times it does. That a healthy body helps you maintain a healthy mind, and a healthy mind helps you maintain a healthy body. Draw strength. Let's take this directly from World War II. Draw strength from your faith. There was a saying in the war, there were no atheists in foxholes. And when your life was at risk, everybody believed in something, whether it was God or whether it was values or whether it was family. Draw strength from your faith. Fourthly, focus on the facts. Focus on the facts, and most specifically, focus on those facts that you can affect. Stop getting caught up in the 24-hour news cycle and the speculation and rumoring and the constant repetition and frightening things. Focus on the facts, and focus on the facts that you can affect personally, and then shut it down after a very short while. And just remember, all you got to do is outlast that virus, and we win. You know, I grew up in Newfoundland and grew up listening to gospel music. And there's one song that always stuck in my mind as a leader was, "Be not afraid, come follow me, for I will lead you always." And be the leaders now in this war against COVID-19 by doing all these things I mentioned and more, and pay respect to those incredible people from that greatest generation. And when we're finished and have won it, then commit to a pilgrimage to Europe to go visit those sites where people like Captain Maxwell did such an incredible thing in our service, and go there and remember them and make yourself an even better person.
Well, that's great advice. Can I just say that I've done a lot of panels over my years, and this has been a remarkable one, and I really have been honored to talk to the three of you on this: General Rick Hillier, Captain Martin Maxwell, Corporal Kelly Scanlan. thank them all for joining us today to honor the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. Thank you as well to our audience members at home for being part of the discussion, submitting what have been many thoughtful questions. I know that we haven't got to anywhere near all of them, but we did manage to get some of them on the program. We hope you found the discussion to be insightful and engaging. And if I can just lift one small part of those final comments, is actually from Kelly, from Corporal Scanlan, when she talked about how we're together on this. And, you know, you think back to Captain Maxwell's time, you know, coming in on that glider, taking Pegasus Bridge, and all the battles that followed through Europe to liberate Europe. They were together. They looked after each other. They were side by side. And that's what we have to be on this conflict. It's a very different kind of conflict, obviously, but we have to be together. We don't stand alone, we stand together. As a reminder, please help support Captain Maxwell as he raises funds for those who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, veterans and their families, particularly as they face added challenges during this public health crisis. Funds raised will benefit True Patriot Love Foundation and will be invested into programs and services to support this community during the pandemic and beyond, such as mental health support, family assistance, and programs to assist veterans transitioning to civilian life. You can donate on the Captain's GoFundMe page at gofundme.com/Captain-Maxwell, and the first $25,000 in donations will be matched by a generous donor. So for every dollar you give, the foundation will then receive $2. You see the address right there on your screen. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking with all of you. Remember the sacrifices that have been made in the past and the sacrifices that are still being made today. Have a great evening. Goodbye for now.
Wonderful. Great.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, sir.